Please do so as quickly and as quietly as possible. Which brings us to the next statement this afternoon on bus funding. Secretary of State for Transport, Louise Haigh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to update the House on our plans for better buses in England outside London. When we talk about fixing the foundations of our country, our mind should turn to the nation's most popular form of public transport. Because nothing props up our economy more or better supports our society than the 3.4 billion passenger journeys our buses carry each year. These are more than just taking people from A to B. They are a lifeline for young and old in cities or towns, binding us to jobs, public services and opportunity. Trips to the shops, a doctor's appointment, a job interview, buses shoulder the daily needs of Britain. And in doing so, underpin every single one of our national missions. That's why, come what may, this government will always back our buses. Like much of the economy, our inheritance is dire. 40 years of failed deregulation has turned many lifeline bus services into liabilities. Passengers let down as they sometimes wait for hours for buses that don't turn up. Areas cut off as operators prioritise more viable routes in town centres. Fares continuing to rise and nearly 300 million fewer miles being driven since 2010. None of this was inevitable, none of it an accident, but all of it down to choices. Political choices paving the way for decline, placing a ceiling on the ambitions of many, but especially the poorest in society, who catch 10 times more buses than trains. Enough is enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government has chosen to back our buses and the millions who rely on them every day. In last month's budget, we confirmed over £1 billion in funding to improve services, protect vital routes and keep fares down. Today, we are distributing that funding. That means over £700 million for local councils to deliver bus service improvement plans and better meet local needs, and a further £243 million to bus operators, including funding a long-standing grant to drive down fares and drive up services. In many places, this is record investment, and every region, every authority in England will benefit, especially those areas historically underserved, like rural areas and small towns. Yeah. Councils such as Leicester, the Isle of Wight, Torbay and Cambridgeshire will see unprecedented levels of funding for services. At-risk routes will be saved and passengers will see faster, more reliable journeys. We're also putting money into safer bus stops and more accessible passenger information so our bus sector is fit for everyone. And I'm delighted that Metro mayors have welcomed this announcement, with city regions such as Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire and Liverpool receiving some of the biggest allocations. But this isn't all. We're also committing over £150 million to cap bus fares at £3, ensuring passengers don't face a cliff edge of higher prices from next year's, particularly in rural areas where buses are a lifeline. The current fare cap was only funded until 31st of December, meaning that without the action we are taking, some fares would have risen by 80%. We weren't going to let that happen. We're investing to keep fares down and putting money back in people's pockets and provide more frequent services so more people can get to more places, more times of the day. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're not only a pro-investment government, we're a pro-reforming government too. Yeah. And we will not hesitate to overhaul parts of the system that simply aren't working for passengers. If that means changes to how we allocate resources, we will make them. If passengers' needs aren't being met, we will prioritise them. And if laws are needed, we will introduce them. So we've called time on the way bus funding has historically been allocated. Previously, the government made councils compete for funding, wasting resources and delaying decisions. It was overly complicated, led to inconsistent funding and created uncertainty for authorities and operators. We are taking a fundamentally different approach. We have allocated funding based on local need, population, the distance buses travel and levels of deprivation. This puts fairness at the heart of future funding and ends the postcode lottery on bus services. It ensures taxpayer money goes to the areas in most need, where it will have the most impact and where passengers will most benefit. This is the first stop on our journey to support local areas to take back control of services and deliver better buses across the country. Finally, we will introduce our landmark buses bill in the coming weeks. It is the biggest shake-up of the sector for 40 years. It will allow councils across the country to adopt franchising models, as in Greater Manchester and London. That means local leaders taking back control of services, ensuring routes, fares and timetables are all geared towards local passenger needs. This model works. It's been over a year since buses were brought under public control in Greater Manchester. Since then, passenger numbers have grown, reliability has improved, and new 24/7 services have been introduced. Roads are now managed in a way that works for buses, which means unexpected congestion or unplanned roadworks don't leave passengers stranded. That is what power in local hands looks like. It's why we're simplifying that franchise process, ensuring local leaders waste no time in driving improvements for passengers. And we will remove the ideological ban on publicly owned bus companies so that our buses can finally be run for the public, by the public. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've said it before and I'll say it again. When it comes to our public transport, we are moving fast and we are fixing things. After years of decline, we're putting passengers back at the heart of our buses through record levels of investment and generational reform. Last month's budget sent a signal that even in difficult economic times, this government will never take our buses for granted, because we know that investing in buses means investing in people, in communities and in the future growth of our country. Better buses are just a few stops away, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Gareth Bacon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to open by thanking the Secretary of State for delivering this statement to the House and for advance sight of it. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was, of course, the last government that provided £4.5 billion worth of funding to the bus sector since 2020 alone. £2 billion of that was allocated to support every single local transport authority in England to help deliver their local bus service improvement plan, helping to support buses post-pandemic and ensuring more frequent, more reliable and cheaper bus transport across the country. So on this side, we are familiar with the need to properly fund bus services. But simply spending a bit more money will not necessarily improve outcomes. So we would welcome details as to whether and how the Right Honourable Lady can assure the House and the taxpayer that the money allocated here will actually go to the improvement of the bus services in the long term. And how will she ensure that the money allocated here today and the bus service improvement plans that go with the investment will remain aligned with any possible future franchising? If she cannot make assurances on these points, then there is a danger that the government is taking short-term action that avoids facing complex long-term problems. Unfortunately, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the 4 months of this government so far, that has been their approach to every single major issue that they have faced, whether on the winter fuel allowance, on the family farm tax and on the increase to the bus fare cap. The government seems at a loss as to why its policies are so unpopular and why only a few months into this government they are so deeply distrusted by the British public. Governing is tough, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it requires taking real responsibility and considering the consequences of the decisions before you take them. For example, the decision to increase the bus fare cap from £2 to £3. This will cost users more, wait for it, this will cost users more and perversely will put at risk passenger services on certain routes because it could counterproductively drive bus ridership down. Between 2022 and 2023, we know that the £2 bus cap cut fares outside London by 7.4%, and the rate was 10.8% in rural and non-metropolitan areas in England. That's an example of a policy that worked, which is why the government's decision to increase the cap by 50% is such a disappointment. The Right Honourable Lady, in defending her decision to hike bus fares, has been making the argument that the fare cap only ran until the end of the year. She did so again this afternoon. But as she knows full well, her backbenchers can be excused for not knowing this, but she knows full well It is standard government practice to set funding arrangements until a given date. She herself has only guaranteed the £3 cap until the end of 2025 and has made no commitment to extend it beyond that. She is also well aware that it was a Conservative Party manifesto commitment to extend the length of the cap and maintain it at £2 for the lifetime of this Parliament.
Will she max it?
Not to extend the £2 cap was not an inevitability. It was a decision this government chose to make.
Quite right.
So I ask her why her government claims it cannot afford to retain the £2 bus fare cap, making a real difference to the lives of passengers and the viability of public services across the country. And yet she can give hundreds of millions of pounds in additional funding here, without any guarantee of success in improving service or delivery. While I await her answer, I have a theory, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Lady is set on an undertaking the ideological drive for bus franchising. And make no mistake, it is ideological. Bus franchising does work in some places, but will by no means work everywhere. The government claim they are not going to impose franchises everywhere, but there is a danger that the Right Honourable Lady's push for bus franchising will force local authorities into feeling that they are expected to undertake this ideological venture. A venture that they say they may very well be unprepared and unequipped for, which would in fact lead to a worse outcome for passengers. So in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I call on the Secretary of State to make clear her answers to the questions that I've put forward today and assure the House and the taxpayer that all of the money allocated will be held to account in delivering real and lasting service improvement for passengers, whose interests should, of course, be at the centre of all the decisions made by this government.
Secretary of State.
Grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for his questions. But I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll take no lessons from the opposite benches on good government. The approach to funding allocation is based on need, on deprivation, on population, on bus mileage, whereas his government wasted millions of pounds in forcing areas to compete against each other, picking winners and losers, raising expectations and leaving some Tory-controlled areas, like Essex, that I was in this morning, with absolutely nothing out of the bus service improvement process. This formula and the funding allocated is a fair arrangement, ensuring that every area of the country gets the service levels that they need and can build the improvement plans that they want. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll also take no lessons on ideology. For 4 decades, England outside London has experienced the failed deregulation of bus services, leading to a steady decline in passenger numbers. And this funding is backed up by a once-in-a-generation reform to our bus policy in this country, ensuring that we can deliver better bus services in every corner of the country with public control, backed up by the funding and a government that believes in buses.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Secretary of State's £9 million investment in the bus system across my constituency of Luton South and South Bedfordshire. So does she agree with me, from the comments she's just heard, that it does take a Labour government to really understand not just the cost but the value of public transport, and that it is our Labour government getting on with the job of delivering better buses for our communities?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her support. Not only are we ensuring record levels of funding for the majority of areas in this country, but as I say, we are pushing ahead with reform. There is no point throwing money at a broken system, which the previous government was so content to do. So I'm delighted that we are able to deliver better bus services for the people of Luton.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement, which I warmly welcome. As she made clear, access to convenient, frequent and affordable buses is vital. They are critical to both employment and quality of life, particularly in rural areas. Sadly, however, too many parts of our country lack decent bus services after years of Tory neglect. At a time when we desperately need economic growth, ensuring we have a comprehensive and affordable bus network is vital. I would like to congratulate the Minister on securing the promised funding. We do, however, have some concerns, Madam Deputy Speaker. Uncertainty still surrounds how local authorities can seize the opportunities heralded in the promised changes to bus franchising. Furthermore, if, as the Secretary of State believes, buses are a lifeline for young and old, why is she hitting bus users with a 50% increase in fares? Polling commissioned by the Lib Dems and published last week showed this hike will make 1/3 of people less likely to use a bus. It will have a direct impact on individuals, communities, small businesses and high streets, and hit the most disadvantaged in society the hardest. It would cost just £150 million per year to retain the £2 fare cap. I again ask the Secretary of State to reconsider. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to ask her 3 specific questions. Firstly, when will she publish the full impact assessment on the £2 bus fare cap, commissioned by her department earlier this year? Secondly, will she guarantee the new powers needed for local authorities to franchise bus services will be provided urgently so the bus routes can be restored and new ones added as soon as possible? And lastly, whilst I welcome the change to the allocation process, the rejection of wasteful and expensive competitive bidding between councils, can she confirm that the new, more flexible system will not succumb to the temptations of pork barrel politics we saw so frequently under the last Conservative government?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for those questions, which are all incredibly important. We have committed to publish the evaluation report of the £2 bus fare cap shortly. We will be introducing the Better Buses bill in the coming weeks, which will allow every area of the country to avail themselves of the franchising powers and overturn the ideological ban on public ownership. My department is also taking a much more proactive enabling role with local transport authorities, and we are making sure that they have the capability and capacity in order to move to franchising. And indeed, a significant amount of the funding settlement announced today is specifically for capability and staffing in local transport authorities. And finally, on the pork barrel politics, that's exactly the reason behind this funding today. We are not in the business of picking winners and losers. We want to ensure that every corner of the country has the funding it deserves and the ability to avail itself of the London-style buses that we have enjoyed in London for 4 decades.
Laurence Turner.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that the record of the parties opposite was a 20% cut in the bus service operators grant, a 40p in the pound cut in local bus funding, and 12,000 bus services cut between 2010 and 2023, a fall of more than half, doesn't she think that some of the contributions we've heard today are a bit rich?
Yeah. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We saw bus mileage and bus passenger numbers plummet under the last Tory government, and the honourable gentleman opposite talked about the funding they provided. As I said, they were throwing money at a broken system. This record level of funding for the majority of the country comes alongside massive reform that will mean that we can give back control and deliver the better buses that every corner of the country deserves.
Dame Harriett Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Bus usage after the pandemic had been beginning to recover in Worcestershire after, thanks to the £2 bus fare, but also after the introduction of improvements in routes. And we're campaigning in Malvern to get a better bus service between Worcester and Malvern on a regular basis, including weekends, and a reinstatement of the X43 bus service. We were hoping that we'd be able to do that with some of the HS2 money, the £209 million that had been indicated Worcestershire would be getting. Could she clarify what's happened to that funding and how that links in with her statement today?
Well, I'm very pleased to confirm that Worcestershire is receiving £9.4 million dedicated for local bus services, which is a £4 million increase on this year. That money, of which £5.4 million is revenue funding and can absolutely be delivered for the kind of bus service that she's outlined.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and to the Secretary of State, I want to thank her on behalf of residents in Exeter and across Devon who will be delighted with the £11.6 million of extra funding that has gone into our bus system. And I think when you look around the chamber, it's very clear who does take buses seriously and potentially who doesn't. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, Devon and Torbay have already been given the powers to franchise and otherwise regulate the bus services as part of the devolution deal that was signed off by the government this year. And yet Devon County Council, Tory-run Devon County Council, specifically said they will not use those powers. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that Devon County Council should take buses and passenger experience as seriously as this government does?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. We know franchising works. Greater Manchester went to the franchising process a year ago, and they have already driven revenues, driven passenger numbers, and that has allowed Andy Bernard to step in and use that revenue to keep his own bus fare cap at £2. So with the funding that's being allocated today, local transport authorities can absolutely lower fares beneath the maximum of £3. But I would absolutely encourage all those areas that already have the powers to plan a bus network that is appropriate for their communities, and the department stands ready to work with Devon and Torbay to ensure that they can do that.
Sarah Dyke.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the new funding for bus services in Somerset is welcome. But what my constituents often tell me is that they need a bus rail links to connect areas not served with train stations. So will the Secretary of State outline the exact conditions each tranche of money must be spent on to allow the Council to plan much needed improvements to services in rural areas?
Well, the way that the formula has been designed explicitly benefits rural areas because a third of the allocation is dependent on bus mileage. So that's why a number of areas, including Somerset, have done much better out of today's allocation than in previous years. We're removing the controls that were previously required. All of this funding will have to be spent on buses, but we believe it's right that local transport authorities take those decisions themselves rather than be constrained by central diktats from Whitehall.
Dr. Laurence Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank the Secretary of State for Transport for the £23 million for Kent County Council. And as a Kent County councillor for a little bit longer, has seen the ridiculous hoops and bidding wars that we've had to jump through for many, many years. Can I ask the Secretary of State if the money will be ring-fenced for buses, but it would allow the flexibility for Kent County Council to spend it on the Kent Travel Saver, which is a fantastic initiative to help kids get around Kent for the local schools. And would this money facilitate this? Thank you.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that important question, because we have lifted any controls on this funding from the department. We think it's absolutely right that Kent County Council is able to decide where their bus money goes. So whilst it will be ring-fenced to ensure that it is spent on buses, if areas want to spend it on providing concessions for younger people or for care leavers, for buying new buses or adding new services, that is entirely within their gift, and I think it's right that Kent County Council makes those decisions rather than me.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Passengers in many parts of the country, including my constituents in Kingswinford and South Staffordshire, rely on cross-boundary bus services for shopping, for visiting friends and family, or for accessing vital public services. But too often, those cross-boundary services can feel like a bit of an afterthought. Will the Secretary of State look at how funding mechanisms can be used to encourage passenger transport authorities to properly integrate those services, because community ties don't stop at county boundaries?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable for that question, and it's an important one, and it's one that I hear often, because those cross-border services can be an absolute lifeline for people who are travelling out of area for work. I think that's something that we can absolutely look to consider through the Better Buses Bill, and I hope he will involve himself in the debate as that passes through the House.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a time of optimism for everybody who uses the bus in Welwyn Hatfield. Firstly, after a long Labour Party campaign, we have doubled the frequency of one of those lifeline bus services that the Secretary of State referenced between the QE2 Hospital, to Urgent Care Centre to the Lister Hospital. Secondly, we have had today an announcement of £12.25 million for buses in Hertfordshire. I am hoping that my honourable friend, the Secretary of State, can make it a hat-trick and confirm that local powers will be given to people in Hertfordshire to take buses back under public control.
Well, can I firstly say what an absolute joy it is to thank my honourable friend, the Labour MP for Welwyn Hatfield. He's absolutely right. We can confirm that when the Better Buses Bill is brought forward, that will extend powers to every local transport authority that wants to avail themselves of franchising. And we are very well aware that not every transport authority in the country is either London or Greater Manchester. That's why the department stands ready to work with more rural areas and different types of transport authorities to look at different models to ensure that we can really give them flexibility to build the network that works for their communities.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the statement from the Secretary of State today, particularly the change to funding mechanisms, the move away from hoop-jumping jam jar funding to something that kind of properly takes account of local need. And I very much hope it'll take proper account of rurality. But I want to ask about another issue. Pensioners get free bus travel, but children do not. And in my rural constituency of North Herefordshire, if you don't fit in the very narrow definitions of what you can get free bus transport for, it's £1,000 a year. Is it not time to extend concessionary bus travel also to children? Thank you. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for that question, and she's absolutely right. It's one of the reasons we're looking throughout next year at the bus fare cap as to whether we can look to extend something around young people. But the point of this BSIP funding is it can absolutely be used to deliver concessionary schemes as well, and she should encourage her authority to look at whether some of that revenue funding that has been allocated can be delivered for younger people.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 62,000 people have already signed my petition on change.org to protect the £2 bus fare cap. One young person shared how rising fares makes it increasingly difficult for them to get to college, while another described public transport as a vital lifeline against loneliness. Affordable public transport is essential not only to alleviate economic hardship, but also to address the climate crisis. So instead of increasing the fare cap by 50% to £3 and costing ordinary people hundreds of pounds more a year, why doesn't the government take a page from Greater Manchester's Labour Mayor, Andy Burnham, who's committed to maintaining the £2 fare cap to ensure that public transport remains accessible to everyone?
The combination of Andy Burnham having franchised powers and this transformational funding is why he can keep the bus fare cap at £2 in Greater Manchester. The combination of this transformational funding and more powers to the rest of the country will absolutely enable them to keep fares low as well.
Sakib Batty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was disappointed that the Secretary of State hasn't mentioned the West Midlands a single time in her statement. My constituents across Meriden and Solihull East rely on buses to get to jobs, to job interviews, education and medical appointments. Does she recognise that the most vulnerable in my community and those that need buses most will be hardest hit by the £3, a 50% increase, the £3 bus cap?
I was delighted to meet this afternoon with the Mayor of the West Midlands, Richard Parker, to talk about how he's taken forward the bus powers in the West Midlands, and delighted, of course, to announce £50 million funding settlement for West Midlands, which will be transformational for his constituent.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Constituents in Hartlepool know that bus services are not good enough, and we welcome today the announcement of more powers and more funding for our area. But sadly, the Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchin, Conservative Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchin, has ruled out any exploration of putting the public in control of bus services. Can the Secretary of State advise me how we can get around the bus blocker to ensure decent bus services for Hartlepool constituents?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. He's absolutely right, and Tees Valley have done very well out of today's funding settlement, and I would absolutely encourage the Mayor of Tees Valley to consider franchising options to deliver better bus services for the whole of Tees Valley. But I can also confirm that through the Better Buses Bill we'll be lifting the ideological ban on public ownership, so he could absolutely consider working with his local authority to set up a publicly owned bus company if the Mayor does not choose to avail himself of those powers.
Vera Hobhouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my young constituents in Southampton who attend Ralph Allen School have to put up with an absolutely atrocious service. They first have to go into Bath City Centre and then take a second bus out halfway back to where they came from to get to school, often missing school because of the infrequency of services and paying twice. A direct service would be cheaper, better and safer. Bath Council wants to make services better and franchise services directly, but currently the West of England Mayor is preventing it. I urge her, and will she please urge the West of England Mayor to listen to West of England authorities and allow them to franchise services directly and bring buses back into local control.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and the example that she's described there is exactly what franchising is designed to achieve, to be able to design the services that people rely on and ensure that school children can get to the school and have that direct route. I would encourage all our mayoral colleagues to take forward franchising.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For 14 years, the last government failed communities with a lack of investment in our bus services, fewer services, reduced timetables, increasing unreliability and ultimately less control. Tens of millions fewer bus miles travelled between 2010 and 2023 in my area alone. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that our towns and villages and rural areas depend on our buses, and the almost 24 million announced for the North East Combined Authority turns the page for my community that was so let down by the previous government?
Grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she's absolutely right, particularly in rural areas, buses just simply are not good enough, and there are entire towns and villages that are cut off with no bus service before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m, and that leaves people with ambition completely curtailed. I'm really pleased to have been working with Kim McGuinness, the Mayor for the North East, to ensure that we have the right powers available to her through the Better Buses Bill to really speed up the franchising process and get her the powers as quickly as possible so she can deliver better buses for the Honourable Lady's constituents.
Deputy Speaker, the Barnett Formula Comparability Factor calculates how much money each devolved nation receives as a consequence of UK government spending in England. Wales's comparability factor for transport is now 33.5%. This compares to 95.6% for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Can the Secretary of State confirm whether this unfair funding arrangement also applies to the new bus funding, and say how much Wales would receive in the cash terms if it had the same percentage share of funding as Scotland and Northern Ireland?
Well, I'll take away the exact question about the percentages and ensure I write to her, but I was pleased to meet with Ken Skates, the Transport Minister, just a few weeks ago to talk about their own ambitious plans for bus franchising across Wales, and they are learning the lessons from Greater Manchester and from London and ensuring that every constituent in Wales will be able to benefit better buses, but I'll write to her on that specific issue.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What a fantastic day for every person in Plymouth who uses the bus, and we welcome strongly the Secretary of State's announcement of £4.5 million being invested in our buses over the next couple of years. But the Secretary of State said that this doesn't just represent an investment in buses, but also an investment in people and in communities, and that is fantastic to hear. And will she agree with me that this represents today the Labour government investing in Plymouth?
I'm very grateful to confirm that we are investing in Plymouth and Plymouth's people and Plymouth's buses. Buses are an enormous engine of social justice because, as I said earlier, it is particularly the most deprived that rely on them the most, and I'm afraid that's why they've been so badly neglected in this place for so long. But with this Labour government, that absolutely turns around, and buses are my priority and this Labour government's priority.
Steph Aquarone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I refer the House to my register of interest as a member of Norfolk County Council. I'm pleased to see that £15 million of this new funding will be heading to Norfolk to support our rural bus services, but the model for running buses in Norfolk is broken. We need a service that works for everyone, not just routes to and from the city and the occasional shopping bus. Would the Secretary of State assure me that this money won't just disappear into County Council coffers or route subsidies, but will instead help build the proper public transport network North Norfolk needs?
The Honourable Gentleman's absolutely right, and under the current system, money has been thrown hand over fist at operators, which have then chosen which routes they want and cherry-picked the most commercially viable, leaving local authorities having to step in to subsidise those lifeline routes that people really rely on. The benefit of being able to move to a franchise system, or indeed for areas to set up their own publicly owned bus company, is that they can cross-subsidise properly across the routes and make sure that public money is best spent, and that we're designing routes and networks that really work for local communities.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Friday, I met the 17th Norwich Scout Group as part of UK Parliament Week. I had lots of questions, as you can imagine, on transport. They are particularly concerned about the reliability and availability of buses. Could the Secretary of State expand on how the announcements today will support young people and how we can ensure their voices are heard in this important conversation?
We're very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's particularly important that we encourage young people onto buses so that they develop better behaviours and carry on using buses throughout their adult lives. I'm delighted that we can confirm £1.2 million additional for Norfolk in revenue funding, and it's exactly that revenue funding that will be available to Norfolk to be able to add additional services and improve both the reliability and frequency of their local buses.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker, and I would like to acknowledge the significant investment in Torbay, my constituency, and how welcome this will be. After all, the first Bus Back Better Torbay came up empty from the previous Conservatives. One of the significant issues that has led to significant cuts in our bus services is the recruitment of bus drivers. Can the Secretary of State advise us how they plan to enhance the opportunities for recruitment of bus drivers so this money can be put to good use?
Very grateful. Torbay is a fantastic example of an area that has done well out of this funding settlement but was treated appallingly by the previous bus service improvement plan funding process. He's absolutely right that recruitment of bus drivers has been an issue that has plagued certain parts of the country, and we're working closely with the Department for Work and Pensions through their Get Britain Working white paper to ensure that we can both address recruitment and retention issues in the bus sector.
Jim Dixon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, just a few short weeks ago when the new bus franchising arrangements were announced in this place, honourable members opposite said it would never work without funding attached. Well, now we have our answer, and the £1 billion of funding nationally and the £23 million of funding for Kent, which has been mentioned already, is hugely welcome and will be certainly a big boost for my residents in Dartford, and also a big boost to our efforts to kickstart growth in the Thames estuary. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that boosting connections between our rural areas and our towns is vital to increasing access to jobs?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I get very frustrated in the transport policy space because often we only think of investment in big infrastructure as the mechanism by which to achieve growth, but buses are essential to delivering growth in our local communities. They connect people to jobs, opportunities, education and to each other, and as I say, not only are they a massive engine of growth, they are one of the most important engines of social justice that is available in transport policy terms.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my rural Thornbury and Yate constituents have commented that the level of the bus cap is irrelevant when there are no buses to use. So I welcome the extra funding today, but I wonder if the Secretary of State agrees with me that it should be directed to ensuring a minimum level of service for all users rather than increasing the frequency of services in already well-served urban areas, as has happened previously in the West of England.
Well, the honourable lady is absolutely right. The biggest barrier for people getting the bus is the absence of a bus in lots of communities, and that is why we have directed this significant level of funding into communities in order to ensure that they are invested in local bus services. The benefit of moving to franchising means that we avoid adding more and more operators and more services into commercially viable routes, and that we can design a network that means that more areas and communities are served with the timetables and level of service that they deserve, which is exactly what she addresses, and that will allow a minimum level of funding, minimum level of service, that every area can expect.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I take this opportunity to thank the Secretary of State for visiting the best town in the country, Harlow, this morning. And I want to, personally welcome the £17.8 million worth of funding going towards the bus service in Essex, which is hugely important. I wonder if she would agree with me that the hidden benefit of improving our bus service in Essex is to tackle social isolation, which is particularly an issue in more deprived areas when there isn't a reliable bus service.
I was delighted to be in Harlow with the honourable gentleman this morning announcing record levels of investment for Essex, another area that was badly underserved by the previous government. Someone mentioned earlier that bus passenger numbers have been increasing since COVID. That's true, but concessionary levels are still far below where they were pre-COVID. And I'm afraid that potentially highlights a real issue that he's just mentioned of social isolation and a hidden issue of older people in their homes not able to access public transport. Only by delivering reliable, accessible bus services can we ensure that we're tackling socialisation and giving older people the service that they deserve.
Gideon Amos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The funding for Somerset is clearly welcome at £6 million, much less than was needed, considering Somerset was rated as having the worst county bus service in the country. But I particularly welcome the ending of this lottery competition which sets one community against another. But will the Secretary of State congratulate the volunteers with Somerset Bus Partnership who, working with my Liberal Democrat colleagues running Somerset, have prevented the Conservative County Council from closing the park and ride, got night buses going and have begun a new transport hub since the bus station in Taunton was closed as a result of Conservative privatisation?
Yeah. Well, the Somerset volunteers sound like they're doing a cracking job. I'm very happy to congratulate them and welcome the £6.8 million of funding that's being announced for Somerset today.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under the last government, bus routes in my region in the North East fell by 30% in terms of the number of miles travelled. 30% is a number, but it also measures the aspirations of our region, the opportunities lost, the job interviews that couldn't be attended, the family events that could not be attended. So I welcome very much so the near £24 million of funding given to the North East in this announcement. Can I ask the Secretary of State how she will be working with mayors such as Labour's Kim McGuinness to make sure the aspirations and opportunities of people in my area of Gateshead are given flight by this announcement?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. 30% cuts to his bus services is absolutely shocking. Behind every one of those cuts is a human story, is an opportunity and an ambition curtailed. I've been working really closely with Kim McGuinness in order to look at how we can speed up the franchising process, because under the current legislation, Andy Burnham took 6 years to bring a single bus service under public control, despite being elected twice in that period on a mandate to do so. We want to ensure that we drastically speed that up and reduce the cost to local transport authorities and mayoral authorities in getting to franchising, so that that money can be spent effectively on local bus services.
Helen Morgan.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Shropshire is one of the worst served counties in England for public transport, having lost 63% of its bus miles since 2015 compared to a national average of about 19%. If you want to get to the closest hospital in Telford from Market Drayton, which is a 20-minute car journey, you'd be looking at a 5-hour round trip on the bus. And we only have one service operating on a Sunday between Oswestry and Chester. So I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was quite disappointed by Shropshire's allocation in this round of funding, which is only £2.5 million of revenue. I wonder if the Secretary of State would meet with me to understand the huge transport challenges that we face in Shropshire and see if we can't do better than that.
Well, I'm delighted to confirm that Shropshire's Ardell allocation is £3.1 million, so she's already got £600,000 more out of today's statement.
Amanda Martin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's biggest reform to England's bus system in 40 years sees the people of Portsmouth having power put back into the hands of our communities. Today's funding and the cutting of red tape and postcode lottery ensures bus routes are where they are needed, allowing all to access work, medical appointments and social life. Can the Secretary of State inform those in Portsmouth North how the funding award and the soon-to-be-tabled landmark buses bill will support these welcome changes and truly put people first?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for standing up, as she always does, for Portsmouth and its people. Today's settlement is funding that will be ring-fenced towards buses to make sure that Portsmouth gets the level of funding it needs, but then crucially the flexibility and control to deliver it where it is needed most. And the powers that we will be announcing in the coming weeks will mean that Portsmouth can avail itself of those powers to take back control of its bus services and deliver routes, services and set levels of fares that are right for the people of Portsmouth.
Josh Babarindi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a few hours ago I marched with Eastbourne residents like Jodie Atherton and Eastbourne businesses like DB Domestics and the Rosie Lee Cafe against Conservative-run East Sussex County Council's car crash bus service improvement plan in Seaside in Eastbourne after they failed to adequately consult with residents and failed to properly model the impact of their plans. Will the Secretary of State review East Sussex County Council's catalogue of failures in this case, and will she introduce safeguards to ensure that community voices are at the heart of any bus service improvement plan that the funding she's announced today will fund in my patch of Eastbourne?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises some important points, but it's right that local people have the mechanisms and the ability to hold their local authorities to account, and that's why one of the mechanisms that we'll be introducing through the Better Buses Bill is a local network safeguard to ensure that communities and constituents' voices are at the heart of any changes to their local bus network.
Colin Naismith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I strongly welcome the statement by my honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, which will deliver £5.4 million for buses in my area, a significant real terms increase on previous years. And when I met with the local chief executive of my Chamber of Commerce and asked him what the biggest barrier to growth was in our area, he said poor public transport. So does she agree with me that this investment, as well as the reforms that the government have spoken about, are crucial if we are to break down barriers to opportunity and grow our economy?
My honourable friend makes such an important point, and that is why we have put this at the heart of our priorities for this government, both in delivering growth but also allowing people to access opportunity. The picture he's painted there is one that I'm sure lots of colleagues across the House will hear time and time again, that the biggest barrier that lots of businesses face is poor local transport and the ability to widen their labour market and ensure that people can access opportunity, which is why we're so delighted to announce this transformational funding today.
Sarah Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome Secretary of State's statement today that every region of England and Wales will benefit, especially rural areas and small towns. Currently, in the Chippenham constituency, large agricultural industries based in the countryside are having to find transport themselves privately in order to get shift workers in and out of their businesses. The College of Further Education has had to cap the hours of study because the last bus leaves so early that students can't continue to follow a proper day of work. And this is a real problem for growth and skills in my rural constituency of Chippenham. Will the Secretary of State ensure that those counties that are not currently part of a wider mayoral system also get the funding that they need? Thank you.
Very grateful. Colleges and large employers that have shift workers are two of the institutions that often raise with me the frustration about local bus services. And the problem in the current system is that nobody has the ability to require operators to run services according to their timetables or their shift timings. The move to franchising will allow local areas to design those services and ensure that buses do run at the time that shifts finish or that colleges open or close. And the new model of this funding formula today absolutely ensures that rural areas get the funding that they deserve.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend will not be surprised that I'm welcoming the £124 million for the South East and the £23 million for Kent, the biggest proportion of any allocation in the South East in this settlement. It is striking that in the last 14 years there have been 20% fewer bus miles because of the last Tory government in Kent. And will she join me in challenging Tory-run Kent County Council to use this money and the powers offered to them by this Labour government in order to be able to make better bus services for places like East Thanet?
Grateful to my honourable friend who is a true champion for the people of Kent. This is a record investment in them and their bus services, an area that was badly underfunded by the previous government, where Kent lost out repeatedly through the bus service improvement process. This funding will help deliver better bus services, but if Kent choose to avail themselves of the powers that will come their way as a result of next month's Better Buses Bill, then that will be the moment where they can actually deliver a public transport network and better bus services that serve all Kent's constituents.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I very much welcome the Secretary of State's comments and refer to her building better buses, as she said in her statement. Will the Secretary of State commit to ensuring that funds for bus funding will go to our UK-based bus manufacturers, such as Wright Bus in Northern Ireland, who are reliable, are efficient, and whose clean energy buses meet the needs of customers as well as our environmental obligations? And how will the Secretary of State ensure that we support the best of British? Thank you.
Well, I was delighted to announce £500 million worth of investment in Wrightbus just a few weeks ago, buses that will be making their way around the country and that are fully electric, so cleaner, greener and a better service for passengers as well. We will be announcing some measures shortly in order to encourage investment in UK manufactured buses, and we've already announced the establishment of an expert panel in order to ensure that when buses are ordered in this country, they are built in this country as well.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome the Secretary of State's announcement that over £40 million will be coming to the East Midlands Combined Authority for investment in our local buses. That covers Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. I know Mayor Claire Ward and other local leaders will spend that money very effectively. Does she agree with me that this is an opportunity to give people more opportunity to get ahead in work, through their leisure, through social interaction, but also to help us get to net zero?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that point, and he's absolutely right. This is a massive moment for the East Midlands with their new mayoral authority and this record level of funding for bus services. And of course, they will go into the CRSTS round in 2027. Buses are an enormous opportunity to meet all our missions, and that's why I'm pleased to work across government on our mission boards, both to ensure that buses contribute to our growth mission, but also crucially our net zero mission.
Sarah Coombs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Buses are essential in my constituency, which is why I'm very grateful to the Government for the £50 million invested in the West Midlands Combined Authority area. When operators cut services, such as the 46 bus that goes through Hampstead in my constituency, it is devastating for the community. So after decades of failed deregulation, I'm really grateful that the Government's turning the page. And does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's much better for local leaders to have control over local bus services?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and when services like the 46 are cut, it has real-world implications both for people attempting to access work or going to see their friends and family or get to the local high street. Having a franchise system under the Mayor Richard Parker will mean that he has control. He can contract out the 46 service and require an operator to run it. At the moment, when an operator cuts it, we've got absolutely no say or control over it, and that's what leads to those terrible real-world consequences.
Can I thank the Secretary of State? Points of order will come after the next statement. Can I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the Chamber personally to give that statement, and we'll have a few moments whilst the front benches switch over. If not wishing to take part could leave as quickly and as quietly